The New Year invitation arrived on a cold afternoon, slipped quietly under the door, as if it didn't want to be noticed. Aisha picked it up with careful fingers. It was simple. No decoration, no warmth. Just a short message written in sharp, confident letters. New Year's Eve dinner, 8 p.m., our house. No please, no we'd love to see you, just an order. Aisha knew who had written it. Mrs. Carter, her mother-in-law. For a moment, Aisha stood still in the middle of the small apartment she shared with her husband. The heater hummed softly, fighting the winter cold. Outside, the city was preparing for celebration. Lights, music, laughter. Inside her chest, something tightened. She had been part of this family for 2 years now. 2 years of polite smiles, 2 years of careful words, 2 years of feeling like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Daniel noticed her silence. "What is it?" he asked gently, walking over. Aisha handed him the invitation. He read it and sighed. "She wants us there," he said gently. "It's New Year. We can't say no." Aisha nodded, though her stomach twisted. She wanted to ask why every visit left her feeling smaller, why every dinner ended with a quiet humiliation disguised as a joke. But she didn't. She never did. That evening, Aisha stood in front of the wardrobe, staring at the few dresses hanging inside. Most of them were old, some were faded. She touched a simple blue dress, the one she wore to her job interviews, the one she saved for important days. Was this an important day? She ironed it carefully, smoothing every wrinkle, as if doing so might calm her thoughts. She brushed her hair neatly and applied just a touch of makeup. Not to impress, just to avoid giving anyone a reason to mock her. When Daniel saw her, he smiled. "You look beautiful," he said. Aisha smiled back, but deep down she knew beauty had never protected her in that house. The drive to Mrs. Carter's home felt longer than usual. Streetlights passed by like silent witnesses. Fireworks were already popping in the distance, early celebrations filling the night sky. Daniel talked about plans for the coming year. "A promotion might be coming," he said. "Things will get better." Aisha listened and nodded. She hoped he was right. Mrs. Carter's house stood tall and proud at the end of a brightly lit street. Every window glowed warmly. Expensive decorations covered the entrance. Laughter spilled out before they even rang the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Mrs. Carter stood there, perfectly dressed, pearls resting on her neck, a practiced smile on her lips. Her eyes went straight to Aisha. Slow, cold, judging. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "you made it." Aisha greeted her politely. "Happy New Year," she said softly. Mrs. Carter didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away. Inside, relatives filled the room. Cousins, aunts, uncles. Glasses clinked, music played. Everyone seemed happy. Except Aisha. She felt invisible and exposed at the same time. Mrs. Carter's voice suddenly rose above the noise. "Daniel," she called. "Come here." She ignored Aisha completely. As Daniel walked over, Mrs. Carter leaned toward another woman and whispered something. They both laughed. Aisha didn't need to hear the words. She had learned to recognize that laugh. She folded her hands together and took a slow breath. Just one night, she told herself. Just survive one night. The clock on the wall showed 7:58 p.m., 2 minutes before dinner, 2 minutes before everything would begin. Dinner began with the sound of plates being placed on the table, golden plates, perfectly folded napkins, food arranged like art. Aisha took her seat at the far end of the long table, carefully smoothing her dress as she sat down. She kept her eyes lowered, afraid that even a glance might invite criticism. Mrs. Carter stood at the head of the table, like a queen surveying her kingdom. She clapped her hands once. "Everyone," she said brightly, "let's start the evening properly." Glasses were lifted, smiles appeared. Then her eyes landed on Aisha. "And you," Mrs. Carter added, tilting her head, "you did try to dress nicely this time. That's progress." A few people chuckled. Aisha felt heat rush to her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't thank me," she said loudly. "I just believe a wife should reflect her husband's status." She paused. "Some do it better than others." Silence crept across the table. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Mom," he said quietly. Mrs. Carter waved her hand dismissively. "I'm just making conversation." Conversation. Aisha swallowed hard and picked up her fork. As the food was served, Mrs. Carter continued. "Aisha," she said suddenly, "do you even know what this dish is?" Aisha looked up, startled. "Yes," she replied politely. "It's—" Mrs. Carter interrupted her with a laugh. "Oh, she thinks she knows." More laughter followed. "I suppose when you grow up eating simple food, fine dining feels confusing." Aisha's hands trembled slightly. She placed her fork down. Daniel looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. Mrs. Carter noticed. "That's the problem," she said, pointing gently with her glass. "What does she bring?" she asked. No one answered. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else avoided eye contact. Mrs. Carter smiled. "Exactly." Aisha felt something crack inside her chest. Not loudly, quietly. The kind of break no one notices, except the person who feels it. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. Respect yourself, even when others don't. But respect was hard to hold on to when you were being stripped of it piece by piece. Mrs. Carter leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said casually, "when Daniel married you, I worried." She sighed dramatically. "I wondered if love was enough to compensate for lack." Aisha's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back. "Don't cry. Not here." The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 11:30 p.m. Still time before midnight. Still time for more damage. Mrs. Carter lifted her glass again. "I want to make a small toast," she said. Everyone raised their glasses hesitantly. "To family," she said, eyes locked on Aisha, "and to hoping that in the new year, some people learn their place." The words landed like a slap. Glasses clinked. Aisha didn't lift hers. Her hands were clenched under the table, nails digging into her skin. Daniel finally spoke. "That's enough, Mom." Mrs. Carter smiled sweetly. "Oh, Daniel, I'm only helping." Helping. Aisha slowly stood up. For a second, everyone froze. "I'm sorry," she said softly, voice shaking but controlled. "May I be excused for a moment?" Without waiting for permission, she walked away from the table. In the bathroom, she locked the door and leaned against it. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, tired, wounded. She pressed a hand to her mouth to silence the sob threatening to escape. "Just a little longer," she told herself. "Just make it to midnight." Outside, laughter continued. Inside, Aisha stood alone. Unseen, unprotected, but not broken. Not yet. Aisha returned to the dining room with her face calm and composed. No one would have guessed that just moments earlier she had been fighting tears in silence. She took her seat again. Mrs. Carter noticed immediately. "Oh, good," she said sweetly. "I was afraid you'd decided to run away." A few people laughed nervously. Aisha said nothing. Dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The music felt louder. The laughter felt forced. Every sound pressed against Aisha's chest. Mrs. Carter tapped her spoon lightly against her glass. "I almost forgot," she said. "I prepared a little tradition for tonight." Daniel frowned. "What tradition?" Mrs. Carter smiled. A test. The word hung in the air. A test? Someone repeated. Yes, she said proudly. In our family, we believe a new year should begin with clarity, especially about the women who marry into it. Aisha felt a chill crawl down her spine. Mrs. Carter turned to Aisha. Aisha, dear, she said, since you're part of this family now, it's only fair you prove yourself. Daniel stood up halfway. Mom, stop this. Mrs. Carter raised a finger. Sit down. And he did. Mrs. Carter clapped her hands again. Bring it. A servant entered carrying a large tray. On it lay a pile of dirty dishes, stained napkins, and leftover food. Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Carter pointed at the tray. In the new year, she said calmly, a good wife should know how to serve without complaint. She looked directly at Aisha. Clean these, here, in front of everyone. The room fell silent. Aisha's heart pounded in her ears. She waited for someone, anyone, to say something. No one did. Daniel stared at the table. Mrs. Carter tilted her head. Well, she asked, or is this too much for you? Aisha slowly stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she didn't let it show. I'll do it, she said quietly. Mrs. Carter smiled. That's the spirit. As Aisha washed the dishes at the side sink, she felt every eye on her, some with pity, some with judgment, some with satisfaction. Mrs. Carter continued speaking, as if nothing unusual was happening. You see, she told the table, humility is important, especially for girls who marry above their station. Aisha's hands trembled in the cold water. She focused on the sound of running water, trying to drown out the words. Above her station. A plate slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed. Mrs. Carter turned sharply. Oh dear, she said. Careless, too? She sighed dramatically. This is exactly what I feared. Aisha bent down to pick up the broken pieces, her fingers bleeding slightly. She didn't look up. She refused to cry. The clock ticked louder now. 11:58 p.m. 10 minutes to the new year. Mrs. Carter approached Aisha slowly. You know, she said softly, I gave Daniel everything. Education, connections, a future. She leaned closer. And then you came. Aisha finally looked up. Mrs. Carter's eyes were cold. Do you really think you belong here? The question cut deeper than any insult. Aisha opened her mouth, then closed it. She lowered her gaze again. Silence was her shield. Mrs. Carter straightened and addressed the room. This, she said, is what patience looks like. But what she didn't see was the fire quietly forming beneath that patience. When Aisha finished cleaning, she dried her hands and returned to her seat. Her fingers ached. Her heart hurt more. The clock showed 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes. Mrs. Carter raised her glass one last time. Almost a new year, she said. Let's hope it brings improvements. She smiled at Aisha. Some people need them more than others. The clock ticked. 11:59 p.m. Aisha inhaled slowly. For the first time that night, she lifted her head. The room was painfully quiet. Even the music seemed to fade, as if it knew something was about to happen. The clock's second hand moved slowly. 11:59 p.m. Mrs. Carter lifted her glass again, confident, satisfied. Let's count down, she said cheerfully. 10, 9. Everyone joined in. Aisha didn't. Her heart was beating steadily now, strangely calm. Enter 3, 2, 1. Midnight.
Fireworks exploded outside. Bright lights filled the windows. Cheers echoed through the house. "Happy New Year!" voices shouted. But Aisha remained standing. She took one slow step forward, then another. Her voice cut through the celebration, clear, steady, impossible to ignore.
"Before this year begins," she said, "I would like to speak." The room froze. Daniel turned to her, startled. "Aisha?" he whispered. Mrs. Carter frowned. "This is not the time." "It is exactly the time," Aisha replied. Silence fell again. She reached into her bag and placed a thick envelope on the table. "I stayed quiet tonight," Aisha continued, "because I was taught that patience is strength." She looked directly at her mother-in-law. "But silence should never be mistaken for weakness." Mrs. Carter's smile faded. Aisha opened the envelope and spread several documents across the table. Bank statements, contracts, receipts. "I sold my father's land 2 years ago," Aisha said. "The only inheritance my parents left me." Daniel's breath caught. "I used that money," she continued, "to save Daniel's business when it was drowning in debt." Daniel stood up abruptly. "What?" he said. "You told me the loan was approved." "I didn't want you to feel ashamed," Aisha said softly, "so I let you believe that." The room erupted in whispers. Mrs. Carter stared at the papers. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Daniel never needed her money." Aisha turned one document toward her. "The renovation of this house," she said calmly, "was paid from my account." Mrs. Carter's face drained of color. "That chandelier," Aisha added, pointing upward, "the furniture, even the dinner you're enjoying tonight." She paused. "All of it came from me." The words hit like thunder. Daniel sank back into his chair, trembling. "You did all this alone?" he asked. Aisha nodded. "I worked night shifts," she said. "I cleaned offices. I took extra jobs." She looked around the table. "While being told I brought nothing." Mrs. Carter stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly. "You're lying," she said, her voice sharp. "You planned this." Aisha didn't raise her voice. "I planned nothing. I endured." She picked up the last document. "And this," she said, turning to Daniel, "is the transfer I made last month, the one that cleared the final debt." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He walked toward Aisha and dropped to his knees in front of her. "I failed you," he said, voice breaking. "I let them hurt you." Aisha placed a hand on his shoulder. "This night," she said, "was not about revenge." She turned back to Mrs. Carter. "It was about truth." Fireworks continued outside, bright and loud. Inside the house, Mrs. Carter stood frozen. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Her authority had collapsed. Her cruelty had been exposed. The clock ticked past midnight. A new year had begun, and with it, everything had changed. The room was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the fading echo of fireworks from outside. Mrs. Carter stood frozen, her perfectly painted face drained of color. The authority she had wielded so easily for years was gone in an instant. Daniel held Aisha's hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice trembling. "I should have seen it all. I should have protected you." Aisha squeezed his hand gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "I stayed quiet because I believed in us. But tonight, silence is over." She straightened her back, standing taller than she ever had. Her eyes met Mrs. Carter's. The once cold woman finally saw something she had never expected. Strength. "You judged me," Aisha said calmly. "You thought I was weak. You thought I was nothing. But tonight, the truth speaks louder than your insults."
Mrs. Carter opened her mouth, but no words came out. Aisha turned to the rest of the family. "This year," she said, "we start fresh. But respect is not optional. It's earned. And I will no longer allow anyone to forget that." Some relatives whispered among themselves, eyes wide. Others nodded subtly. The power dynamic had shifted. Daniel hugged Aisha tightly. "You've done everything," he said. "You saved me, this house, everything. And you still stood strong." Aisha smiled faintly. "For a new year to be truly new, we must leave behind old grudges, old fears, and old abuses. And sometimes," she added, looking back at Mrs. Carter, "we must remind people who we really are." Mrs. Carter swallowed, her proud demeanor cracked, humbled. For the first time, she understood that control built on cruelty could never withstand truth and courage. Outside, the fireworks continued to light the sky. Inside, a new power quietly filled the room. Aisha had claimed it, not through anger, not through revenge, but through resilience, patience, and unwavering truth. The new year had arrived, and so had Aisha's new life.